probably the most famous of his essays, Montaigne's essays, is on Cannibals. In his own time, it achieved some notoriety, and it is a touchstone of the anti-colonialist theories of the last generation or so, where the notion of Eurocentrism and the perspective on indigenous peoples everywhere other than Europe has become a focus of academia and philosophy and journalism and all that stuff. But the core of the essay is a masterclass in how to think something over. And Montaigne uses this essay and this topic as a way of turning an idea over and over and over to try and get down to the core of it and try and judge it, to analyze it in a very methodical way, in a way that at first might seem a little anti-methodical, a little haphazard, but that slowly takes on this empirical cast where you can see he is doing something very deliberate here. It comes significantly in the late 1500s, in a era of great exploration, well, mid to late 1500s, where the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, largely have been discovered by Europe, and the great expeditions are going over there. Columbus and Cortez and all these guys. And they're going over there primarily, as you read in their journals, to secure wealth, to take natural resources, to take gold most especially, to convert en masse, whole continents full of people to the cause of Christianity. They were driven initially by the impulse to get to Asia, to open up new trade routes, sealed off by the loss of by the acceptance that the Eastern European paths towards Asia were largely sealed off or blocked, let's say, by Muslim control, by Islam, by Islamic governments. And so they were trying to find a new way to Asia. They stumbled on the Americas, and they said, hey, maybe they've got some gold. And they have certainly all of this other stuff that we, back in Europe, being much more sophisticated, but with very fewer resources, much smaller land in general, we don't have as much of. So wouldn't it be great if we could start to take these? And of course, the horrors ensue. And go look at those if you care. But in this, you were also getting an awful lot of studies coming back. All of these people, all of these expeditions were keeping journals, and they were writing letters to people back home, telling them about what they are finding and what the people are like. And so you get a lot of early examples of ethnography, honestly, of studies of, well, these are, interesting tribes of people, but they are all, of course, very much, as academics would say, they are very much others. They are different than we are, and there is a certain either pejorative sense to that, as in, well, they're like animals. We don't, they're not really human. We don't have to treat them that way or think of them that way, especially if it conflicts with our economic goals. But And then the flip side is also a kind of childlike, noble savageness thing. They are the descendants of Adam and Eve. They are, living in the original Eden sort of thing, which comes up which comes up more prominently later, but it's there kind of at the very beginning as well in seed form. And so Montaigne is reading these as he's coming in, and he's starting to, see, all right, there are some attitudes being expressed here about these savages of the New World, and how does how can I take that? How can I judge that information as it's coming to me? B, how can I use that information to reflect upon my own society? And if the information I'm learning about them is true, what does that say about my society in a comparison? Because Montaigne is always setting up these comparisons. His mind is eternally restless with this, and he's always trying to find, well, okay, these people say the world is this way, these people say the world is that way. What are the odds that either one of them are 100% correct? It's probably a middle way. Let's try and find where where that Venn diagram crosses and zero in on that. And so he undertakes to discuss in his way the New World, the savage inhabitants of the New World. Because he is writing this for a largely French audience, somewhat international, but he is writing in French, and it's just his little personal journal that he says, and, it's a private concern. No one need bother listening here, nothing to see here. But he knows he can criticize within that. He can just, if he does it deftly, as he does everything, if he does it cleverly, perhaps with a certain veil of plausible deniability, he can lob some criticisms at his people. He starts off, again, the comfortable European, man of means, sitting in his tower, literally, writing. When King Pyrrhus passed over into Italy, he starts off with a classical reference from the age of ancient Rome. When King Pyrrhus passed over into Italy after he had reconnoitered the formation of the army that the Romans were sending to meet him, he said, "I do not know what barbarians these are, for so the Greeks called all foreign nations, but the formation of this army that I see is not at all barbarous." A couple of things here. One, he is talking about the ancient Rome and rivalry with the Greeks. So he's sort of playing on that familiar court with a European readership. Two, he is talking about it in military terms, which is automatically going to put it in a sort, a serious vein. He's not talking about, oh, aren't those people so adorable? No, he's talking about the engagement with the other in a military term and coming to judge them on those grounds. King Pyrrhus comes and sees, like, all right, I heard that these people were all barbarians, but damn, look at the way they do things. They do things differently than we do, but you know what? They do them a little better, because that's a tough-looking group. Well, we know what Rome did to the Greeks eventually. So Montaigne comes out and says, thus we should beware of clinging to vulgar opinions and judge things by reason's way, not by popular say. That's what he's doing in everything, trying to judge for himself to dismiss what everybody else is telling him and just try and analyze what evidence he can find and make up his own mind, discover his own mind in the process, but to respect his own mind enough to judge the material. And then he goes into a long discussion of engagement with foreign or alien civilizations. He talks about how the legendary city of Atlantis was a flourishing island and a great civilization, and it was buried by the flood and, destroyed forever, no trace of it left on Earth. So the idea that great civilizations, oh my God, can fall. He's drawing on his own, classical education there, but pointing it out to, everybody else, just reminding them, like, yeah, you in Europe, you think you are invincible, invulnerable, the leaders of the earth, the natural stewards of God's dominion, but civilizations fall. Other groups thought they were tops too, and we walk over their graves every day. He starts talking about islands in particular and suggesting like what great civilizations they are, and these islands in a sense are no different than the mainland, like the continental Europe that France is attached to. They can be perhaps a little snooty about, well, it's a small island somewhere, small islands can do great things. He does an interesting little thing also, just with the calculation of it, with the metaphor of it, talking about islands and talking about the natural geography of them. Says, it seems there are movements, some natural, others feverish, in these great bodies, just as in our own. When I consider the inroads that my river, the Dordogne, is making in my lifetime to the great bank in its descent, and that in 20 years it gained so much ground and stolen away the foundations of several buildings, I clearly see that this is an extraordinary disturbance. For if it had always gone at this rate, or was to do so in the future, the face of the world would be turned topsy-turvy. What he's talking about here is, of course, river erosion. The river near his home, wends around and, it takes dirt with it as it goes, and over time, it can undermine the foundations of some pretty solid-looking houses. I'm sure he had seen that quite a bit. You want to build your house next to a river. It looks very pretty. It's very convenient for water, but your house could collapse in a couple of years. But also the characterization here of the land itself being a body. It is a kind of human identity there. Great bodies, just as in our own. When I consider the inroads that my river, again, personalizing as if it's part of him, my river, the Dordogne, is making in my lifetime. Very abstract concepts of science and ethnography and sociology, he's bringing down to an immediate level. Mine, it's about me. It's all very personal, very identifiable, very, very human. He goes on to say, talking about some of the what he has read about foreign peoples. He talks about a book he hears, from Aristotle, of questionable provenance there. He talks in somewhat condescending terms about some of the people he has heard from. This man I had was a simple, crude fellow, a character fit to bear true witness. For clever people observe more things and more curiously, but they interpret them, and lend weight and conviction to their interpretation. They cannot help but altering history a little. He is getting this supposedly from this visitor who has just come back from a voyage, and he is telling him, this man is telling Montaigne about what he has seen and what he has heard. And Montaigne is saying, well, it's good that this guy, my friend, isn't very bright. So he's just going to give me something very straight. And in this, you get the comfortable position of the superior person looking down his nose just a little bit at somebody else. That sense of condescension and how that can color what you're reading. But also the notion of the lack of art. He's saying that clever people would try and cherry pick information to fill out a portrait that they've already concocted in their head. But simple, crude people are just going to give a flat description of what they saw, and you're going to get more unadorned facts that way, that they're, too stupid to shape the information. They never show you things as they are, but bend and disguise them according to the way they have seen them. Smart people. No. We need a man either to be either very honest or so simple that he has not the stuff to build up false inventions and give them plausibility. Again, really leaning hard on that I'm going to play the part of the pompous jackass role to just put you on notice that, well, all of this is a matter of perspective. All of this is colored by exactly these kinds of attitudes. And you need to sit back and judge it as it comes in. Consider the source, consider the context, consider every angle of what you're studying before drawing any conclusions about it. Do not just take someone's word for it. Now, to return to my subject, I think there is nothing barbarous and savage in that nation from which I have been told, except that each man called barbarism whatever is not his own practice. Now we're getting to the nub of what he's saying. He's been sort of wandering around, again, discursively tossing in this and that. The way Montaigne sidles up to his topic is kind of charming. You can be maddening if you're really impatient. But the way he does it, he's just moving up to it slowly. He can't necessarily come in and just go gangbusters off the top, because he's got to warm you up a little. He's got to loosen you up. He has to seduce you a little with the charm of his anecdotes and his clever little phrasings, so that you're ripe when he wants to go for the kill. For indeed it seems that we have no other test of truth and reason than the example and pattern of the opinions and customs of the country we live in. There is always the perfect religion, the perfect government, and the perfect and accomplished manners in all things. Those people are wild, just as we call wild the fruits that nature has produced by herself and in her normal course, whereas really it is those that we have changed artificially and led astray from the common order that we should call wild. He's going full bore sociology here, saying, we color everything that we find, the Eisenberg principle. When we go in and we start mucking around with it, it changes and creates chaos in nature. Nature has the greater sense of order, even if we're too dumb to see it sometimes. It is not reasonable that art should win the place of honor over our great and powerful Mother Nature. Always making that argument. All our efforts cannot even succeed in reproducing the nest of the tiniest little bird, its texture, its beauty and convenience, or even the web of the puny spider. All things, says Plato, are produced by nature, by fortune, or by art, the greatest and most beautiful by one or the other, or of the first two, the least and most imperfect by the last. He is foursquare for nature. So he's suggesting that nature, which you find in the New World, where it's not so civilized in this particularly European sense, nature is better than all of the incrustations of civilization and culture and art that we force onto nature to try and make it more convenient or efficient. And he starts talking more about the people and the use of them. They get up with the sun and eat immediately upon rising, to last them through the day, for they take no other meal than that one, like some other Eastern peoples, of whom Suidas tells us, who drink apart from meals. They do not drink then, but they drink several times a day and to capacity. Their drink is made of some root, and is of some color of our claret wines. They drink it only lukewarm. Its beverage only keeps 2 or 3 days. It has a slightly sharp taste, not at all red. He's identifying just facts. He is culling this from books that he's reading, but he is sitting there and very studiously recording basic data of civilizations, of tribal cultures, that you can make some use of this information. It's not necessarily colored by very much. There aren't, there's not a presupposition that everything they're doing is wrong. He's just saying what they're doing. He says, I have tried it. It tastes sweet and a little flat. I don't know that he tried it because he did not go there. Maybe his friend or whomever brought him back a little batch. If it kept only 2 or 3 days, good luck with a transatlantic voyage. But you cannot take that as truth. You need to lean back from that and say, okay, he's kind of making that up. That part of it is BS, but the other stuff sounds true. So he's encouraging you to jump in and help out with the process of making meaning here. He's not just saying, listen to me, I know everything. He's inviting you by slipping in that little point there to exercise your own judgment, your own reason. The whole day is spent in dancing. The younger men go to hunt animals with bows. Some of the women busy themselves, meanwhile, with warming their drink, which is their chief duty. Again, simple ethnography, just jotting down details. He starts to note that they do, however, have a certain warlike culture, and they value this. One of the old men in the morning before we begin to eat preaches to the whole barnful in common, walking from one end to the other and repeating one single sentence several times until he has completed the circuit, and the buildings are fully 100 paces long. He recommends to them only 2 things: valor against the enemy and love for their wives. That's the only thing this priest of sorts has to say. Domestic love your wife is domestic tranquility, domestic productivity, focus on the home. Valor against the enemy is your public duty, necessarily. It is the focus of it. But it's just interesting that he's saying that, okay, these are the only 2 things that they care about: home and war, which is somewhat unnerving to a imperialist country who are seeking to go in and perhaps exploit these people or conquer these people. It's like, gee, they only really care about their home and fighting. Is that an enemy you want to challenge? Is that a fight you want to pick? I'm not so sure. They have some sort of priests and prophets, but they rarely appear at the people, having their homes in the mountains. On their arrival, there is a great feast and solemn assembly of several villages. Each barn, as I have described it, makes up a village, and they are about 1 French league from each other. So everybody's sort of distant within very large houses. Each village is essentially one big longhouse. Again, ethnography. But that notion of they have some sort of priests and prophets, but they rarely appear before the people, having their home in the mountains. So there is a religious element, but it is distant. It is outside the common everyday workings, which is a kind of a deistic model for religion. God in deism, in European terms, would be the clockmaker god, who he's there, but he's sort of, he's got other things going on. He's just outside the common everyday workings. And it's an interesting little note that he's slipping in there, and it's like, gee, curious. Comparative religion added into everything else. He talks about the consequences for prophets. The prophet speaks to them in public, exhorting them to virtue and their duty. The whole ethic science contains only these 2 articles: resoluteness in war and affection for their wives. War. He prophesies to them to come, and the results are that they are to expect from their undertakings, and urges them to war or holds them back from it. But this is on the condition that when he fails to prophesy correctly, and if things turn out otherwise than he was predicted, he is cut into 1,000 pieces if they catch him, and condemned as a false prophet. For this reason, the prophet who has once been mistaken is never seen again. Consequences. You have to be right. Now, on the one hand, this is an interesting little religious critique where prophets, priests, can thunder about this, that, or the other thing. This is going to happen. The end of times has come. You must repent now because the end is near. If the apocalypse doesn't come at the appointed time, is that person responsible for stirring up all the noise? Maybe that person should be a little bit more conscientious in speaking. Interesting. But also the violence of it, which seems somewhat shocking, because we're getting this nice little image of this society far away. But now we're told, all right, they like war. They're focused on war. But now also, he is cut into 1,000 pieces. That's visceral. That is violent. That is shocking. And, the guy said something. Freedom of thought. I don't know. Not so much there. But that seems a little off note. This isn't some Arcadia all of a sudden. This isn't Eden. This isn't some blessed natural place where everybody and everything is wonderful. Divination is a gift of God. That is why its abuse should be punished as imposture. Among the Scythians, when the soothsayers failed to hit the mark, they were laid, chained, hand and foot, on carts full of heather and drawn by oxygen, on which they were burned. But those others who come and trick us with assurances of extraordinary faculty that is beyond our ken, should they not be punished for not making good with their promise, or for their temerity of their imposture? So here we're getting like a little ethics lesson also, and it's an uncomfortable place, because now we're talking about burning, and it's getting a little dire. I don't know. this is getting awkward. The but it starts to take on a little bit more of a shade when he starts bringing it again closer to home. We've been dealing with the far away. Let's start considering something a little bit more accessible, a little bit more immediate to the European consciousness. He talks about these people have wars. They bring back, each man brings back his trophy, the head of the enemy he has killed. Another very visceral moment. That's like, are these people necessarily perfect? It's as if at this moment he has gone from evaluating some general information about them to kind of making the pro-savage argument that they are, the natural people, in an Edenic paradise who, should be honored and respected. And now they're looking like, well, no, maybe they're a little bit brutal, maybe they're a little bit mean, maybe they're a little savage, almost like Europeans. He is flipping that back and forth. So, when you read that, he brings back the trophy of the head of the man he has killed. It's like, yeah, that's something a European would do. But it's also something that we can judge objectively. And it's not a rosy picture of him, and it's not an evil picture of him. It's just a picture of him, and a truthful representation, perhaps. They talk about they take prisoners, they torture them. This done, okay. After they have treated their prisoners well for a long time with all the hospitality they can think of, Xenia, how nice. Each man who has a prisoner calls a great assembly of his acquaintances. He ties a rope to one of the prisoner's arm, by the end of which he holds him a few steps away for fear of being hurt, and gives his dearest friend to the other arm to hold in the same way, and these two, in the presence of the whole assembly, kill him with their swords. That's rough. This done, they roast him and eat him in common, and send him to pieces with their absent friends. This is not, as people think, for nourishment. As of old the Scythians used to do, it is to betoken an extreme punishment, or an extreme revenge. And the proof of this came when they saw the Portuguese, great colonizers of that era, who had joined forces with their adversaries, inflict a different kind of death on them when they took them prisoner, which was to bury them up to the waist, shoot the rest of their body full of arrows, and afterwards hang them. They thought that these people from the other world, being men who had sown the knowledge of many vices among their neighbors, and were much greater masters than themselves in every sort of wickedness, did not adopt this sort of vengeance without some reason, and that it must be more painful than their own. So they began to give up their old method and to follow this one. So the natives of South America, that's where they are learning from the Europeans how to be vicious. It's not necessarily their own invention. It's something that, oh yeah, you got a better idea for torture. That's a good one. I never heard of that. We're gonna give that a shot. And it's this shocking moment when you're realizing that, okay, they're not different. They're just exchanging ideas on how to, torture. And the torturing itself gets very specific in very uncomfortable ways. I am not sorry that we notice the barbarous horror of such acts, but I am heartily sorry that, judging their faults rightly, we should be so blind to our own. I think there is more barbarity in eating a man alive than in eating him dead, and in tearing by tortures and the rack a body still full of feeling, in roasting a man bit by bit, in having him bitten and mangled by dogs and swine, as we have not only read but seen within fresh memory, not among ancient enemies but our own neighbors and fellow citizens, and what is worse, on the pretext of piety and religion, than in roasting and eating him after he is dead. And there we have the Inquisition. He name-checked Portugal, which was one of the Portugal and Spain, the whole Iberian Peninsula was the ground zero of the Inquisition, and the torture of heretics, supposedly, against the Catholic Church, and trying to get them to confess or to repent or to convert or do anything as a squelching effort against non-believers in their mind. The whole beginning of the 1500s was rife with this, especially in Western Europe, where in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella expelled all Jews and Muslims, all non-Christians, from their country and drove them underground. And this movement just picked up steam in the decades afterwards, where they were just torturing and slaughtering human beings for their lack of proper support for the Pope. And Montaigne lived through this. Montaigne probably knew people who had suffered through this, had been killed through this. Montaigne is using this pretext of, well, let's consider how other nations live, and he's talking about that in a very abstract and, again, ethnographic, giving a little bit of cover to himself way to sidle up to this real subject, which is we Europeans are more barbaric than the worst that they can come up with. And he's saying it, you know, for all of the slaughter, for all the misery, for all of the horrors that we inflict, the worst part almost is that we are doing it in the name of piety and holiness and religion. And the savagery that we show is somehow sanctified by divine right. And it is just awful. Now, he makes that note. Then again, he has to tack back the other way because he doesn't want to go off on one note. He says, so we may call these people barbarians in respect to the rules of reason, but not in respect to ourselves who surpass them in every kind of barbarity. Their warfare is wholly noble and generous, and as excusable and beautiful as this human disease can be. Its only basis among them in their rivalry in valor. And he starts to take their argument to it, and he tips over into a kind of Orientalism on the part of the natives and starts painting them in this broad brush, which again, we can't fall for as readers. We need to say, well, all right, you know, they are not fighting for the conquest of new lands, for they still enjoy that natural abundance that provides them without toil and trouble with all necessary things in such profusion that they have no wish to enlarge their boundaries. They are still in a happy state of desiring only as much as their natural needs demand. Anything beyond that is superfluous to them, which sounds a little idealistic. And while I'll go along with certain parts about, you know, yes, they have a natural profusion in the rainforest, and they don't need to, you know, organize into crops or anything like that. But there is again a sort of a rosy picture there that I am kind of leaning back from and saying, I'm not so sure about that. That sounds suspicious. Montaigne is never going to let you settle into one position. He's never going to say declaratively, this is the way it is, and you have to believe me. He is going to present the information to you and show the process of turning that information over, of judging it, of sifting through it, sometimes in a somewhat disorganized fashion, sometimes in a very funny fashion, but always looking at it from one angle, looking at it from another angle, checking back from a third angle, trying a different one, always, always, always seeking an ultimate truth that is never going to be found, but in the process we can come up with some semblance of it. And the we don't need to go into that. He ends it, let's say, with a discussion of the interaction between conquerors from Europe and the natives. And talks about the Europeans engaging or meeting with some of the natives and trying to get them to cooperate with them in certain respects, strike up a little bit of a treaty that they will probably violate. At the time of the late King Charles IX, the king talked to them, the king of the natives, for a long time. They were shown our ways, our splendor, the aspect of a fine city. After that, someone asked their opinion and wanted to know what they had found most amazing. They mentioned 3 things, of which I have forgotten the third, and I am very sorry for it, but I still remember 2 of them. Again, suggesting that incompleteness of the record, that perspective, that limitation of the objectivity here. They said that in the first place, they thought it very strange that so many grown men, bearded, strong, and armed, who were around the king, it is likely they were talking about the Swiss of his guard, should submit to obey a child, and that one of them was not chosen to command instead. The king at this time was 12 years old. So, yeah, it looked suspicious to natives, like, okay, you're taking orders from a child. He's 12. What, why? It doesn't make sense. And from their perspective, would you take these people seriously? Second, they have a way of their language of speaking of men as halves of one another. They had noticed that there were among us men full and gorged with all sorts of good things, and that their other halves were beggars at their doors, emaciated with hunger and poverty, and they thought it strange that these needy halves should endure such an injustice, and did not take the others by the throat, or set fire to their houses. Why should the natives, the Americans, take Europeans seriously? If, yeah, okay, you guys dress nice, but I understand a lot of your country live in squalor, and there's suffering, and there's no acknowledgement of that. There's no plan for bringing the society along. This isn't a great society if it leaves so many people behind. And why should we respect that? And Montaigne is writing this as a warning sign to his fellow Frenchmen at this time, his fellow Europeans in general, saying, the cannibals aren't necessarily all over there. They are cannibals here. We are eating our own necessarily because we have such unequal wealth distribution, because we have so much squalor that we just don't care about. And that will come back to bite us, because when he is warning of, how these people could endure such an injustice and did not take others by the throat or set fire to their houses. Well, of course, in 200 years they will. French Revolution. Montaigne is ringing this bell 200 years ahead of the French Revolution. Before the guillotine falls, he is saying, we got to do something about this. We are eating our own. The cannibals are not in America. The cannibals are here. And